I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom, watching my ex-husband's face turn from arrogant to ashen as the judge read through my evidence. For years, he had convinced me I'd never survive without him, but as I watched him crumble under the weight of his own lies, I finally understood my worth wasn't determined by his permission. It was a Tuesday evening in early autumn when I first noticed something was wrong. I was sitting on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, 6 months divorced and finally feeling like myself again. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark, the kind man I'd been dating for about 2 months. "Need to talk. Can I call you?" My stomach tightened. Those words never preceded anything good. When he called, his voice sounded different, hesitant, almost embarrassed. "Hey, Jessica, I got a strange call today from your ex-husband." I gripped my coffee mug so hard I thought it might shatter. What did he want? He said I should know some things about you, that you have problems, that you're unstable. The mug trembled in my hand. I set it down before I could drop it. He said you had a breakdown during your divorce, that you made up stories about him. He warned me you might do the same to me. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of anxiety pressing down on my chest. David had found out about Mark. Somehow, he always found out everything. "I told him I'd form my own opinions," Mark continued. "But Jess, is there something I should know?" I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. The seeds of suspicion David had planted were already taking root. "No breakdown," I said quietly. "Just a controlling ex who doesn't want me to move on." But I could tell Mark wasn't entirely convinced. And why would he be? He'd known me for 2 months. David had had years to perfect his performance as the concerned, reasonable ex-husband. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony until night fell completely. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, untouched. I should have been angry, but instead, I felt a familiar resignation. Of course David would do this. Of course he would try to sabotage any happiness I found. He had promised as much during our divorce. "You'll never truly be free of me," he had said with that cold smile I had come to dread. "No one will ever know you like I do. No one will ever want you once they know the truth." The truth, according to David, was that I was emotionally unstable, financially irresponsible, and sexually frigid. None of it was true, but he had spent years making me believe it was, making me believe I was lucky he tolerated me at all. I met Mark for coffee the next day. He seemed distant, watching me carefully as I stirred sugar into my latte. "I'm sorry about last night," he said finally. "It just caught me off guard." "I understand." I wrapped my hands around my mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "What else did he tell you?" Mark hesitated. "That you have a spending problem, that you maxed out his credit cards during your marriage, that you slept with his best friend." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Wow, he's really going all out. So none of it's true?" I looked directly into Mark's eyes. "None of it. I can show you my credit score if you want. As for the cheating accusation, that's David projecting. He had at least 2 affairs that I know of." Mark nodded slowly. "I believe you. But why would he make up such specific lies? Because he knows they're hard to disprove, and because he can't stand the thought of me being happy without him. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, my sister called in a panic. "Jess, what the hell is going on? David just called Rob." Rob was my brother-in-law. They'd always gotten along well with David during our marriage, partly because David was careful to be charming around my family, and partly because I had hidden the worst parts of our relationship from them. What did he say? He told Rob you're dating some guy who has a criminal record, that he's worried about your safety. Rob's freaking out. I pressed my fingers to my temple. Mark doesn't have a criminal record. David is making things up because he can't stand that I'm dating someone. Are you sure? Rob said David was really convincing. Of course I'm sure. I've known Mark for months. He's a middle school science teacher, for God's sake. But I could hear the doubt in my sister's voice too. David had always been good at sounding reasonable, concerned, trustworthy. It was one of the things that had attracted me to him in the first place. His absolute certainty, his confidence. It had taken me years to realize that what I had mistaken for confidence was actually control. That night, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. You should be more careful about who you let into your bed. Your new boyfriend isn't who you think he is. I blocked the number immediately, but my hands were shaking. How many more people had David contacted? How many more lies had he told? The next morning, I woke up to an email from my apartment manager. Dear Ms. Reynolds, we've received a complaint about unauthorized overnight guests in your unit. Please remember that according to your lease agreement, guests staying more than 3 consecutive nights must be registered with management. I stared at the email in disbelief. Mark had never stayed over. Not once. This had to be David's doing too. I called the management office. I haven't had any overnight guests. Who made this complaint? I'm afraid we can't disclose that information. But they seemed very concerned about the frequent male visitors to your apartment. Male visitors? There's been one man who's visited me a handful of times. He's never stayed overnight. The complainant provided dates and times. Of course he did. David had always been meticulous. That afternoon I met Mark for lunch. He looked troubled as he slid into the booth across from me. My principal called me in this morning, he said without preamble. Someone sent an anonymous email suggesting I was in an inappropriate relationship with a parent from school. My stomach dropped. Let me guess. They specifically mentioned me? Mark nodded. How did you know? Because David is trying to destroy every part of my life. Again. I explained everything. How David had isolated me during our marriage, controlled our finances, monitored my communications, told me what to wear, who to talk to, how to behave, how he had convinced me over time that I was worthless, unstable, unlovable without him. When I finally got the courage to leave, he told me he would make sure I regretted it, that he would make sure no one else would ever want me. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. I'm so sorry, Jess. No one should have to go through that. The worst part is, it's working. He's making people doubt me, making them see me through his eyes. Not everyone, Mark said firmly. I'm still here. But for how long? I wondered. How long before David's poison spread too far? 3 days later, I received a certified letter from David's lawyer. He was filing for modification of our divorce decree, seeking to claim half the value of my retirement account, which I had built up in the 6 months since our divorce was finalized. His claim was that I had hidden assets during our settlement negotiations. It was completely false. Every penny in that account had been earned after our divorce, but it would cost me thousands in legal fees to fight it. I called my divorce attorney, Lisa, who had helped me escape my marriage. She was furious when she heard what was happening. This is harassment, plain and simple, she said. And not just the legal action. The calls to your boyfriend, your family, your apartment manager. It's all part of a pattern of continued control and abuse. But what can I do? It's his word against mine. Not necessarily, Lisa said thoughtfully. Start documenting everything. Every call, every text, every complaint. And Jessica? Has he been following you? The question sent a chill through me. I don't know, maybe. Sometimes I get the feeling I'm being watched, but I tell myself I'm being paranoid. You're not paranoid. Men like David don't just let go, they escalate. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list of every incident I could remember since the divorce. The pattern was clear and frightening. David was systematically targeting every new relationship in my life, every source of support, every path to independence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another text from an unknown number, another piece of evidence that David was still controlling my life. At 2 a.m., my doorbell rang. I froze, heart pounding. Then it rang again, followed by insistent knocking. Jessica, I know you're in there. We need to talk. David's voice, slurred, angry. I called 911 with shaking hands. My ex-husband is at my door. He sounds drunk. I have a restraining order. That was only partially true. I had a temporary restraining order during our divorce proceedings, but it had expired when the divorce was finalized. I hadn't renewed it because David had been keeping his distance physically, if not emotionally. Jessica! More pounding. Open the door or I'll break it down. Please hurry, I whispered to the dispatcher. The police arrived 12 minutes later. By then, David had moved from threats to pleading. Baby, please. I just want to talk. I miss you. Don't you remember how good we were together? I watched through the peephole as the officers approached him. He straightened immediately, his demeanor changing from desperate to dignified in an instant. Officers, thank goodness you're here. I'm worried about my ex-wife. She's been acting erratically, and I'm concerned she might harm herself. I opened the door. That's not true. He showed up drunk at 2 a.m., pounding on my door and threatening to break it down. One of the officers looked at David skeptically. Sir, have you been drinking tonight? I had one beer with dinner, hours ago. He's lying, I said. You can smell the alcohol on him from here. The officer stepped closer to David and asked him to take a breathalyzer test. David refused, claiming it was an invasion of privacy. Sir, you're on private property, after being asked to leave. You can either take the test, or we can discuss this down at the station. David's face hardened. Fine, test me. But I want it on record that my ex-wife has a history of making false allegations. The breathalyzer showed a blood alcohol level well above the legal limit. The officers told him he needed to leave immediately and not return. This is ridiculous, David snarled. She's the one who needs help, not me. She's unstable. Ask anyone. As they escorted him away, he looked back at me with such hatred that I felt physically ill. You think you've won? He called. You think you can just replace me? You'll never belong to anyone else, Jessica. Never. One of the officers turned back to me after they had put David in a taxi. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you file for a new restraining order tomorrow. This situation could escalate. I nodded numbly. I will. Thank you. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, jumping at every sound, the officer's words echoing in my mind. This situation could escalate. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went straight to the courthouse to file for a restraining order. The clerk took my statement and my evidence, the 911 call, the police report from the night before, text messages David had sent me over the past few months. The judge will review your petition today, she told me. If it's approved, we'll schedule a hearing where both parties can present their case. How long will that take? Usually about 10 days. In the meantime, you'll have a temporary order in place. 10 days. 10 days during which David would know I had filed against him. 10 days for him to plan his defense, to gather his own evidence of my supposed instability. As I left the courthouse, my phone rang. It was Mark. Jessica, we need to talk. My heart sank. Not again. Not now. What's wrong? Not on the phone? Can you meet me at Riverside Park in an hour? Mark, you're scaring me. I'm sorry. It's just, I think someone's been following me, and I found something on my car this morning. I met Mark at the park, sitting on a bench overlooking the river. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. What happened? I asked as I sat beside him. He handed me a manila envelope. This was under my windshield wiper when I came out to go to work. Inside were printouts of my medical records from 2 years ago. Records that should have been private. They documented my visits to a therapist during the worst period of my marriage, when I was struggling with depression and anxiety. But these weren't just printouts. They had been annotated in David's neat handwriting, highlighting phrases like, patient exhibits signs of emotional instability and possible paranoid tendencies. He's trying to convince you I'm crazy, I said, my voice hollow. It's not working, Mark said firmly. But Jess, how did he get these records? This is a serious privacy violation. I closed my eyes, remembering. During our marriage, I signed a form allowing him access to my medical information for insurance purposes, he said. I never thought to revoke it after the divorce. You need to do that immediately, and you need to report this to your attorney. I nodded, gathering the papers with shaking hands. I filed for a restraining order this morning. There's a hearing in 10 days. Good. I'll be there with you. I looked at him in surprise. You will? Of course. Jessica, I know we haven't been dating long, but I care about you. I'm not going to let this guy intimidate me, and I'm definitely not going to let him hurt you. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear. Gratitude. Hope. The faintest glimmer of strength. Thank you, I whispered. The next week was a blur of legal preparations. I revoked David's access to my medical records, collected evidence of his harassment, and worked with Lisa to build our case for the restraining order. Meanwhile, David escalated his campaign against me. He sent emails to my boss, suggesting I was stealing from the company. He told mutual friends I was having a nervous breakdown. He even contacted my elderly parents, telling them he was worried about my mental health and suggesting they consider having me committed for evaluation. Each attack made me stronger. Each lie made me more determined to finally break free of his control. I documented everything meticulously, building a case not just for the restraining order, but for something bigger. 2 days before the hearing, Lisa called with news. The judge wants to combine your restraining order hearing with David's motion for modification of the divorce decree, their related cases, and he thinks it will be more efficient to hear them together. My stomach dropped. Is that bad for us? Actually, I think it's perfect. It gives us a chance to show the judge the full pattern of David's behavior. And Jessica, I've been thinking, we should file a counter motion. For what? To modify the custody arrangement for Baxter. Baxter was our dog, a golden retriever we had adopted together 5 years ago. In the divorce, we had agreed to share custody, with Baxter spending alternate weeks with each of us. It was the one thing David had seemed genuinely emotional about during our settlement negotiations. You want me to take Baxter away from him? I want you to have full custody, with David getting supervised visitation at your discretion. If he's unstable enough to need a restraining order, he's not stable enough to care for a dog. I hesitated. Using Baxter as leverage felt wrong somehow, even after everything David had done. Think about it, Lisa said. You don't have to decide right now. That night, as I was walking Baxter in the small park near my apartment, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. David's silver BMW. He was watching me again. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the car, making sure the license plate was visible. Then I called the police to report the violation of my temporary restraining order. By the time they arrived, David was gone, but I had the photo and the responding officer took a report. More evidence for our case. As I continued walking Baxter, I thought about Lisa's suggestion. David loved Baxter, maybe even more than he had ever loved me. The thought of taking Baxter away from him permanently made me uncomfortable. But then, I remembered how David had systematically tried to destroy every new relationship in my life. How he had invaded my privacy, threatened my livelihood, and tried to turn my own family against me. When I got home, I called Lisa. File the counter-motion, I said. But I don't want to take Baxter away completely. I want the option for David to have supervised visits, contingent on his behavior. Fair enough, Lisa said. I'll draw up the paperwork tomorrow. The day of the hearing arrived with a sense of finality. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy blue dress, applied minimal makeup, and pulled my hair back in a simple ponytail. I wanted to look stable, reasonable, and unafraid. Mark met me outside the courthouse, along with my sister and brother-in-law, who had finally seen through David's manipulations. My parents had wanted to come too, but I had asked them to stay home. They were in their 70s, and the stress would be too much for them. You ready? Mark asked, squeezing my hand. I took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. Inside, David was already seated at one of the tables with his attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. David himself was impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that I recognized. I had bought it for him for our last anniversary together. He didn't look at me as I entered, but I could feel his awareness of my presence like a physical thing. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the court to order. She explained that she would be hearing both matters, my petition for a permanent restraining order and David's motion to modify our divorce decree, as well as my counter-motion regarding Baxter. Let's begin with Mr. Reynolds' motion, she said. Counsel, you may proceed. David's attorney stood and launched into a well-rehearsed speech about hidden assets and financial dishonesty. He claimed I had deliberately concealed the true value of my retirement account during our divorce negotiations, depriving David of his fair share. Lisa let him finish before standing to respond. Your Honour, my client's retirement account contained exactly $42,310 at the time of the divorce settlement, as disclosed in our financial affidavits. The current value of $86,429 represents contributions made entirely after the finalization of the divorce, using income earned solely by my client. Mr. Reynolds has no claim to these funds. She presented bank statements and contribution records that clearly showed the timeline of deposits. The judge reviewed the documents carefully before turning to David's attorney. Counsel, do you have any evidence that Ms. Reynolds concealed assets during the divorce proceedings? Your Honour, we believe the rapid growth of the account suggests earlier contributions that were not disclosed. That's not evidence, Counsellor. That's speculation. David leaned over and whispered something to his attorney, who nodded. Your Honour, we would also like to note that Ms. Reynolds' spending habits during the marriage suggest she had access to funds beyond what was disclosed. She regularly made large purchases without apparent concern for budget constraints. I bit my lip to keep from laughing out loud. The large purchases had been made on credit cards that David controlled, often at his insistence. He had wanted me to look a certain way, drive a certain car, live in a certain neighborhood, all to maintain the image he wanted to project. Lisa had anticipated this line of attack. Your Honour, we have credit card statements from the marriage showing that these purchases were made on accounts in Mr. Reynolds' name, often at his direction. Far from hiding money, my client was actually in a financially controlled relationship where Mr. Reynolds determined all spending. She presented more documents, credit card statements, emails from David instructing me to buy specific items, even text messages where he criticized my appearance and demanded I fix it by shopping for new clothes. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. I'm not seeing any basis for Mr. Reynolds' motion. In fact, what I'm seeing suggests a pattern of financial control during the marriage. David's face remained impassive, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. A tale I remembered from our marriage. He was furious. Let's move on to Ms. Reynolds' petition for a permanent restraining order, the judge continued. Lisa presented our case methodically, the late-night visit to my apartment, the police report, the breathalyzer results, the car outside my home, in violation of the temporary order. She showed the judge the medical records David had illegally accessed and distributed. She played recordings of voicemails he had left me, his voice slurring as he alternated between threats and pleas. Then she called Mark to testify about the calls he had received from David, the anonymous email to his principal, and the medical records left on his car. My sister testified about David's call to her husband, attempting to turn my family against me with lies about Mark's non-existent criminal record. Throughout it all, David sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to his attorney, but otherwise showing no reaction when it was his turn to respond. His attorney tried to paint me as the unstable one, the one who couldn't let go of the marriage. Your Honour, my client has moved on from this relationship. He has no desire to contact Ms. Reynolds. These alleged incidents are either fabricated or greatly exaggerated. Mr. Reynolds is a respected financial advisor with an unblemished professional record. He has no history of violence or harassment. Lisa was ready for this too. Your Honour, we have one more piece of evidence to present. She handed the judge a USB drive. This contains footage from Ms. Reynolds' apartment building's security cameras on the night of May 15th, when Mr. Reynolds appeared at her door, intoxicated and threatening. It clearly shows him arriving, attempting to force entry, and later being escorted out by police. The judge inserted the drive into her computer and watched the footage. David's attorney looked startled. He clearly hadn't known about this evidence. After reviewing the video, the judge looked directly at David for the first time. Mr. Reynolds, this footage directly contradicts your attorney's claims. You very clearly did attempt to contact Ms. Reynolds, while intoxicated, in a manner that any reasonable person would find threatening. David finally spoke, his voice calm and reasonable. Your Honour, I was concerned about my ex-wife's mental state. She has been making increasingly erratic decisions since our divorce, including becoming involved with a man she barely knows. Mr. Reynolds, your ex-wife's dating choices are no longer your concern. With all due respect, Your Honour, when those choices affect her stability and judgment, they become my concern, especially when we share custody of our dog. And there it was. The real reason for all of this, not the retirement account, not even a desire to control me, though that was certainly part of it. David couldn't stand the thought of losing his last connection to me, Baxter. The judge seemed to realize this too. Let's address the counter-motion regarding the dog. Lisa presented our case for modifying the shared custody arrangement, citing David's erratic behavior, his violation of the temporary restraining order, and his demonstrated inability to respect boundaries. Your Honour, Ms. Reynolds is not seeking to eliminate Mr. Reynolds' relationship with Baxter entirely. She is asking for primary custody, with Mr. Reynolds having supervised visitation rights contingent on his compliance with the restraining order and completion of an anger management program. David's attorney objected, arguing that the shared custody of Baxter had been part of our divorce settlement and should not be modified without significant cause. The judge considered this. I'm inclined to agree that a modification requires significant cause. However, Mr. Reynolds' recent behaviour, as evidenced by the police reports and security footage, does raise serious concerns about his judgment and stability. She turned to David. Mr. Reynolds, it appears to me that you have been using the shared custody of the dog as a means to maintain control over your ex-wife's life. Would you agree with that assessment? David's mask of reasonableness slipped for a moment. That's absurd. I love Baxter. He's my dog too. And yet you've been willing to risk your relationship with him by violating a court order and harassing Ms. Reynolds. That suggests your priorities may be somewhat skewed.
David's face flushed. For the first time, I could see him losing control. She's trying to take everything from me. First my marriage, then my dignity, now my dog. What's next? The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Reynolds, control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. David took a deep breath, visibly struggling to regain his composure. I apologize, Your Honor. This is an emotional situation. Indeed, and it's precisely that emotional volatility that concerns me. The judge looked at her notes for a long moment before speaking again. I'm ready to rule on these matters. She denied David's motion to modify our divorce decree, finding no evidence of hidden assets. She granted my petition for a permanent restraining order, prohibiting David from contacting me directly or indirectly, coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, or contacting my family, friends, or associates about me. And finally, she modified our custody arrangement for Baxter. Ms. Reynolds will have primary custody of the dog. Mr. Reynolds may have supervised visitation once per month to take place at a neutral location such as a park, with a third party present. After 6 months, if Mr. Reynolds has complied fully with the restraining order and completed an anger management program, the court will reconsider unsupervised visitation. David's face went completely white. This is outrageous. You're taking my dog away because of a few misunderstandings? Mr. Reynolds, I'm taking your dog away because you have demonstrated a pattern of harassment and boundary violations that make me question your judgment. If you wish to have a relationship with this animal in the future, I suggest you reflect carefully on your behavior and make appropriate changes. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. As we stood to leave, David finally looked directly at me. His eyes were cold with hatred. This isn't over, he said quietly.
Lisa stepped between us. Actually, David, it is over. The next words out of your mouth will be a direct violation of a court order, which will result in your arrest. Is that what you want? For a moment, I thought he might explode. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight. But then his attorney grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Outside the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. Mark hugged me. My sister cried with relief. Even Lisa smiled, a rare occurrence for my usually stoic attorney. You did it, she said. You stood up to him. We did it, I corrected her. I couldn't have done this alone. That evening, I sat on my balcony with Baxter at my feet, and the same coffee mug I had clutched so tightly the night that this all began. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But this time, I wasn't filled with anxiety and dread. I was at peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Dinner tomorrow? I know a place that allows dogs on the patio. I smiled and typed back. I'd love that. Baxter looked up at me, his brown eyes trusting and loyal. I scratched behind his ears. It's just us now, buddy. No more shared custody. No more walking on eggshells.
He thumped his tail against the balcony floor. I took a sip from my mug, the same one I had almost shattered that night when I first learned of David's interference. It had survived, just like me, a little chipped around the edges, perhaps, but still functional, still valuable. For years, I had lived according to David's rules, seeking his approval, fearing his disapproval. I had believed him when he said no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky he tolerated me, that I would never survive without him. But here I was, surviving. More than surviving, thriving, dating a kind man who respected my boundaries, reconnecting with my family, building a career, creating a home that was truly mine. I didn't need David's permission to live my life. I didn't need his approval to be happy, and I certainly didn't need to fear his retaliation anymore. As the last light of day faded from the sky, I made a promise to myself. I would never again let someone else determine my worth. I would never again seek permission to exist. I was free, finally, completely free.